Hello, seventh graders. This is Mr. Shear, and today we're going to take a break from Washington State history, and we're going to look at a very current event, the Electoral College, because tonight, as hopefully you all know, is election night. We have a presidential election tonight, and in order to better, hopefully, help you understand what the numbers are they're counting, we're going to discuss the Electoral College. Before we do that, I want to quickly go over what's going on this week. So today's a lesson on the Electoral College and election night. Tomorrow you will have a test. It's the Chapter 2 test. So at the meet today, we'll briefly review for the test. And you have your Chapter 2 test tomorrow. Then we start Chapter 3 on Thursday and Friday. Topics, just to preview a little bit, topics you'll be doing will be the Oregon Trail. That includes logging and early Washington industries, the Oregon Territory, the Spanish-American War, and the Pig War. So that's what's coming up for the week. And briefly about the test, again, it's on Wednesday, so there's no Google Meet that day. I'll just get online to quickly answer any questions about the test, but mostly I give you that time to take the test. It'll be another Google form. It'll be a mix of multiple choice and short answer questions. Yes, you can use notes for the test. Yes, you can use the internet, and yes, you can use your textbook. So it's open notes, open internet. All right, let's just jump into today's topic. So there's a presidential election tonight. Currently, Donald Trump is the president. He is the 45th U.S. president. And we currently enjoy the oldest democracy in the world. So we have the longest standing history of the public voting in its leadership. This will be the 59th time that we've held an election. So we haven't had a ton of them. And there's other things on the ballot tonight, including members of Congress, both the Senate and the House of Representatives. And of course, there's a governor election, which many people believe in Washington State could have a big impact on our state, especially with COVID, whether we wear masks or masks are not required, etc. But it's current Governor Jay Inslee versus Lauren Culp. So what exactly is the Electoral College? That's the topic of today. And the Electoral College isn't a place, it's actually a political process. So again, there is no physical Electoral College. It's a group of people whose votes really count. So we don't actually vote for the president. What we do is we vote to influence a group of people whose vote then counts. And in Washington, we have 12 electors. There's 12 people who in December will go to Washington, D.C., and they'll vote between the two candidates, and it's their vote that actually gets counted, and they're called electoral votes. So as a citizenship, when we vote, we're just telling those 12 people how we'd like them to vote for us. So one example of an elector is Sophia Dannenberg. And this is Sophia Dannenberg. She is the first African-American woman to ever climb Mount Everest from the United States. She got some fame and notoriety from her climb. She's a world-class climber. Her first major climb was Mount Rainier. She's also climbed Mount Baker. And then a few years ago, she got a job working at Boeing. So because she's seen as somewhat of a local celebrity, she's a person who's well accomplished, and she's very involved in the election campaigns in the past. She's been chosen as one of our state electors. So for Sophia, her vote will matter. She's one of 12 people in Washington who has a vote that will actually determine who the president will be. And for the rest of us, when we vote, we're just telling Sophia how we'd like her to vote on our behalf. So some of you might be thinking, wait a minute, why don't we just vote and whoever gets the most votes wins out of everybody? Why doesn't everybody just get one vote? Why do we even use an electoral college? And the short version is because our founding fathers did not think that the American public who, again, in the 1700s, when the United States was formed, the American public, many of whom couldn't read, and the founding fathers did not think that the American public would always be smart enough to pick their own president. So they put in an electoral college, which is like a middleman, and they don't technically have to vote how we want them to vote. They can vote however they like. And it's meant to be a safeguard so that the American people don't pick a horrible candidate for president. So here you go, fun fact number 1. Originally, the only citizens allowed to vote for electors in their state were white males over the age of 21 who owned land. So when all this was set up, not everybody got to vote. You had to be white, you had to be a man, and you had to be over 21 years old and own land. Fact 2, the first electors were each given 2 votes to cast for president and vice president with no distinction on their ballot which vote was for which position. Fun fact number 3, whichever candidate received 35 electoral votes in the old system became the president. The candidate with the second most votes became the vice president. Can you imagine that now? So if one person gets first, they're president. Whoever gets second is vice president. And in 1789, if you read at the bottom of the screen, there's 69 total electoral votes. George Washington got 35, so he was president. John Adams got 34, so he was vice president. So eventually the rules have changed over time. Now most American citizens over the age 18 are allowed to vote, and each state has their own rules. Some states don't allow felons or prisoners or those deemed mentally unfit to vote. So in some states, former felons and prisoners are never allowed to vote again. But for most states, if you're over 18, you can vote. When I vote, when your parents vote, that is what's called the popular vote. And the popular vote is 1 vote per person. And what they're really voting for, again, when your parents vote or when I vote, what we're voting for is we're asking the electorals to vote for our candidate. Now, what that means is sometimes candidates who get the most popular votes don't get the most electoral votes. And the electoral votes officially happen on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December. But they officially happen in state capitals. So ours will happen in Olympia, Washington, and they're in the middle of December when the Electoral College actually votes. And again, the Electoral College is meant to vote however the people in their state tell them to. So here's the electoral map. And what you'll notice is Washington's here. This is how many people how many points we actually get as far as our votes go. We have 12 people in our state who are electors, and their 12 votes are the ones that actually go towards the presidency. And if you take a minute and look at the map, you'll notice California gets the most votes at 55. Texas is the second most votes at 38. Florida has a lot of votes at 29. New York has 29. And Washington, again, has 12. So these numbers are based on population. The higher the population, the more electors you get. And this, we're going to take Wisconsin's 10 electoral votes as an example to show you how this might work. So basically what this is saying is that Wisconsin again had 10 electoral votes, and the way they come up with that number is they look at how many senators you have. Every state has 2. And then they have 8 congressional districts with 1 U.S. representative per district. So we have 8 members of the House of Representatives. So you'll notice 8 representatives plus 2 senators equals 10 electoral votes. What that tells you is you can look back at this map, and every single state has 2 senators, so you subtract 2 from that number on the state, and that'll tell you how many members of the House of Representatives we have. So in Washington, we've got 2 senators and 10 House of Representative members. That's our Congress. We have 12 members of Congress. Every state has 2 senators, and then you have the number of House of Representatives depends on your population. So in Montana, they've got 2 senators and only 1 member of the House of Representatives. But in Washington, again, we have 2 senators, 10 members of the House of Representatives. All right, so for tonight, popular vote, again, is the total amount of vote. It doesn't really matter, except it tells the electors how to vote, and electoral votes, we know what that is now. That's the number of important votes per state. So how many electoral votes does it take to win the presidency? And the magic number is 270. When they're counting tonight, whoever gets 270 electoral votes first wins. There's 538 votes total, so split that in half, it's 269. So 270 and you got a majority and you win. Now here's what's weird about that. This is a winner per take all system. So if we look at California with its 55 votes, you could have a candidate in California get 1 more vote than the other guy. So let's say for tonight, Trump versus Biden. Typically, California goes Democrat, so we're going to assume that Biden will win California. Biden could get 1 more vote in California, but then he gets all the points. He'll get 55 electoral votes from California. Conversely, Trump could get 1 more vote in Texas than Biden, but he'll get 38 electoral votes. What that means is you win each state. It's a winner-take-all system per state. So that leads to a couple what-ifs. So again, remember there's 12 electors, 12 people in Washington who actually get a vote, but what if they don't want to vote who they're told to vote for? Well, that happens all the time, actually. And nothing. So we could, in Washington, tell everyone to vote for one candidate, and they could change their mind. That actually happened in the 2016 election. We'll look at that more in a little bit. What about this one? What if a candidate gets more popular votes, more people vote for one candidate, but they don't win the Electoral College? Well, then you don't win. The popular vote doesn't really matter. What matters is the electoral votes. And then what if there's a tie? We'll look into that too. So again, it happens and has happened several times that somebody has gotten more votes out of the whole country, but they don't get the 270 electoral votes. And this happens a lot when it's really close in states, because again, if 1 more person in Texas votes for a candidate, that candidate gets all of Texas. It's actually happened 5 times, including our last election, where more people voted for the person who lost. So we're going to look at some elections, just as an example. So in the 2000 election, it was Al Gore versus George W. Bush. And this is how the map looked. Back then, Washington had 11 votes. Now it has 12. But the blue is Democrat, so the blue is Al Gore. The red is George W. Bush and Republican. And what this worked out to was Al Gore actually got more votes than George W. Bush, but he didn't win the electoral map. Some of these states where Bush won, Gore had a ton of votes and Bush barely won, the most famous of which was Florida, which Bush only won by a couple hundred votes, but he got all 25. It's basically the whole state of Florida then voted for Bush. Okay. What about the 2004 election? This is Bush's second term. John Kerry was the Democrat versus George W. Bush, Republican. And if that looks really red to you, it's because, well, it was. Bush did really well this time. He won both the popular vote and the electoral vote. How about the 2008 election? Barack Obama versus John McCain. Obama was a Democrat. McCain was a Republican. Well, if that looks awfully blue to you, it's again because it was. And Obama won both the popular vote and, again, he needed 270 electoral votes to win. He got 286. So he won both the popular and the electoral votes. On his re-election, Barack Obama, the Democrat, went against Mitt Romney, the Republican. And again, Barack Obama won the popular vote, but he very much dominated in the electoral vote. This was seen as a pretty big win, especially if you look at the electoral votes, 332 to Romney's 206. With only 5 million votes separating the two candidates. Now I want to point something out. You look at these total votes, Barack Obama got 65 million votes. This election tonight, over 90 million people have already voted. This is going to be the biggest numbered turnout in election history, by far, today. So many people have voted by mail with the virus that this election tonight will be the largest voter turnout in United States history by far today. And then the 2016 election, of course, it was Hillary Clinton, the Democrat, versus Donald Trump, the Republican. So this was our last election. And maybe by now you're noticing too, the same states tend to vote Republican and the same states tend to vote Democrat. Washington almost always votes Democrat. So here's the split. Oh, oops. Sorry, there we go. Here's the 2016 election. Here's the split. And what you might notice is in Washington, we had 4 of our electors in our state did not vote for Hillary Clinton, even though they were told to. But 4 of our electors in our state chose to vote for somebody else. 3 of them voted for Powell, who wasn't running, Colin Powell, and 1 of them voted for Spotted Eagle. And that's the first Native American vote. Spotted Eagle is, I believe she's from Colorado. She's part of the Teton Sioux tribe that Lewis and Clark encountered. And we had somebody from, I believe it was the Spokane or Puyallup tribe in Washington. One of our electors voted for a Native American woman in Colorado. So 4 of our votes that were supposed to go to Hillary Clinton did not. Regardless, Donald Trump won the Electoral College by a lot. He won by 304 votes to Hillary Clinton's 227. He won by a lot, but if you notice, he lost the popular vote. And again, in this whole election, about 127 million people voted. 90 million have already voted via absentee ballots. There's going to be a lot of votes tonight. The largest landslide in victory, just for fun, was Ronald Reagan versus Walter Mondale. Mondale was a Democrat, Reagan was the Republican. Reagan totally dominated. This is the first election I can remember, and I remember Reagan was a very popular president at the time. So that is the worst landslide. It can happen where one candidate just dominates. Now, what happens again in the elector, like in the case of Washington State? Last time we had 4 that were supposed to vote for Hillary Clinton that didn't. What happens if electors don't vote for who they're supposed to? Well, then they're known as faithless electors because they broke their promise to their political party and voted for somebody else. Nothing really happens to them. So of those 12 electors that will be voting for Washington State tonight, we just hope they listen to us when they actually officially go vote in December. But if they don't, nothing happens to them. It's happened over 150 times in our nation's history. What if there's a tie? And that's where things get really weird. I'm going to go fast. I'm not going to ask you any questions about this, but if you're curious, what if they each get 269 electoral votes tonight, which would be a tie? There's a lot of ways for this to happen. There's 126 different ways for this to happen. All right, so if there's a tie, it actually goes to the House of Representatives, which has 435 members. And then each House, in our case in Washington, we've got 10 House members, have to decide on who they're going to vote for. Each state basically votes through the House of Representatives. So you need 26 out of 50 because we have 50 states. So 26 states have to vote for one presidential candidate to determine the president of the United States if it's an actual tie. As far as the vice presidency goes, there's 100 members of the Senate. They each vote on the vice president. If they have a tie, then the vice president becomes president, and he's got to appoint a vice president, or he or she appoints a vice president. Oh my gosh. And if it's all still a tie by January 20th and Congress can't figure it out, well, then the Speaker of the House of Representatives, in this case Nancy Pelosi, would just become the next president. So if Trump and Biden tie and Congress ties and everybody ties, the Speaker of the House would become the President of the United States. Confused yet? And I won't even get into it of what would happen if we had 3 candidates and they all split the vote. But there's processes in place for that. All right, guys, if I can leave you with one thing, 270 is the magic number tonight that it's going to take to win the presidency. Again, it's winner take all by state. So Washington, historically, always goes Democrat. We probably will again this year. But watch the map tonight if you're watching the election, and whoever gets 270 electoral votes first wins. It doesn't necessarily represent the popular vote, but that's who's going to win this election. All right, guys, I hope to see you at the meet. We'll practice for our test tomorrow. And have a great night. Watch the election.